Nobody talks to Judge Frank Caprio like this, but what you're about to witness shattered every expectation of decorum inside a courtroom built on respect. On a gray morning beneath the American flag, a defendant with a last name that opens doors everywhere else leaned forward and said, "One call to the White House ends this," freezing the room. The amount at stake became more than a $75,000 fine or 60 days of freedom. It became the integrity of the law itself. An arrogant heir accustomed to private jets and closed-door favors, facing a judge known nationwide for compassion and fairness, with cameras rolling and pens hovering as the silence that followed those words would change everything. The defendant was introduced as Alexander Grant, 22 years old, heir to a powerful political dynasty with an estimated family net worth exceeding $400 million. Raised in guarded neighborhoods and elite schools where he learned early that his surname carried weight, his father a sitting president with friends in every institution. Donors and advisors filling the family's orbit, publicly described as reserved and misunderstood, while privately staffers whispered about entitlement, traffic stops dismissed, rules bent, apologies issued on his behalf. Moving through the world assuming doors would open because they always had. His fatal flaw not malice but certainty that consequences were for other people, believing authority existed to serve him rather than restrain him. Teachers recalling arguments over grades, security guards remembering demands instead of requests, once joking that rules didn't apply to him while laughter smoothed over the truth. Unaware that Judge Caprio had spent decades watching privilege test the law and lose, a belief about to collide with a bench that did not bend. The incident began late one night in downtown Providence as surveillance cameras captured a luxury SUV blocking a handicap ramp outside a community shelter, rain slicking the pavement as sirens echoed. Witnesses watched the driver, Alexander, laugh when asked to move, a heated exchange following, citations issued for obstruction and disorderly conduct. The shelter serving families displaced by fires and floods where the ramp mattered, volunteers struggling in the rain, while Alexander waved his phone dismissively and said, "Do you know who my father is?" before walking away. Later posting smiling photos from a private club, treating the citation as a nuisance rather than responsibility, unaware the case would land before Judge Caprio, whose courtroom had become synonymous with dignity. The day of reckoning arriving in a room that smelled of polished wood and paper, light filtering through tall windows, the flag motionless as Alexander entered in a tailored suit with relaxed posture and faint smirk. Murmurs following him down the aisle as some recognized him and others felt the weight without knowing why. Judge Caprio taking the bench with decades of service etched into his calm demeanor. Respected because he listened carefully and believed justice should heal when possible. The room settling as if paused, the case called and preliminary statements beginning while Alexander sighed, checked his phone, rolled his eyes and smirked as evidence appeared. The judge noticing the dismissive shrug toward the victim's advocate and setting his jaw, photographs filling the screen showing the blocked ramp, timestamp, and rain. Alexander interrupted and Judge Caprio raised a hand, telling him to remain silent unless addressed, Alexander offering a thin smile before saying, "With all due respect, Judge, I don't think you understand who you're dealing with," gasps rippling through the room. He failed to realize the judge had seen this before. Video playing as witnesses described the delay, the cold, the child shivering, Alexander looking annoyed while his attorney whispered urgently. Alexander beginning, "Do you know who my father is?" One phone call, hint, before the judge's expression hardened and 5 seconds of silence passed. New evidence contradicting Alexander's claims as he stiffened then returned to arrogance. A volunteer taking the stand with trembling voice describing the weight, the cold, the child's fear as the room went still, Alexander smirking and whispering an insult while Judge Caprio took notes. The defense unraveling as Alexander ignored counsel and prepared to speak again. The courtroom holding its breath when Alexander stood and pointed, declaring that his family donated millions and that the judge worked for him. The defendant rose from his chair without permission, the scrape of polished wood slicing through the courtroom's stillness as he pointed directly at Judge Caprio and spoke without restraint, his voice sharp and entitled, declaring that the case was a joke and that his family donated millions. insisting the judge worked for him, the words hanging in the air like a poison no one could ignore, revealing not just contempt for the court, but a worldview built on power over principle and status over dignity. Gasps rippled through the gallery before collapsing into a suffocating silence as a woman covered her mouth. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively. The defense attorney dropped his pen, and even the court reporter froze, eyes locked on the bench while time itself seemed to compress. Judge Caprio did not react immediately, instead leaning back slowly, removing his glasses with deliberate care and setting them on the bench, his expression shifting not to anger but to calm, unshakable resolve as seconds stretched into an unbearable stillness that instructed everyone in the room that a line had been crossed and consequences were forming, a silence so heavy it spoke for him before a single word was said. Gasps echoing as the bailiff stepped forward, pins dropping and silence swallowing the room, while Judge Caprio leaned back, removed his glasses and looked directly at Alexander as 10 seconds passed, and the judge spoke, beginning calmly but absolutely, saying that in 30 years on the bench he had seen wealth, power, and privilege countless times, but never such blatant disrespect. Alexander's smirk fading as the judge continued that money did not buy immunity, connections did not place anyone above the law, and arrogance did not erase accountability, gently gesturing toward the volunteer and reminding the courtroom that the person harmed mattered, declaring that justice was not for sale, human dignity not negotiable, and that in this courtroom everyone was equal. Fear flickering across Alexander's face as the sentence followed with precision, a $75,000 fine, 300 hours of service at the shelter he had disrespected, 60 days suspended with strict conditions, a public apology, and 2 years of probation. The judge explaining this reflected not just the crime, but the contempt shown, Alexander slumping as any violation would mean jail, the bailiff nodding, tears falling from the volunteer, and the room exhaling as justice stood. Alexander later completing his service quietly as the lesson echoed far beyond the courtroom that no one is above the law, because in Judge Caprio's courtroom justice isn't just blind, it sees everyone equally. And as the story closes, the reminder lingers that justice isn't revenge, it's restoration, and under the law we are all meant to stand the same.